Ready to go.
Okay, everyone, I think it's time, so we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I think I'll read off who we have by phone with us. Boy, I need my glasses here. Commissioner Hazarbadine. Greg, are you there? Yes.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Kiki Parker-Rose.
Yes, I'm here.
Representative Stark, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Commissioner Sebastian Tapia.
Yes, I'm here.
And Wally Hicks is there by phone as well.
Yes, I am.
Okay, in person, we have myself, Chair, and to my left.
Which is on. Yeah, sorry. Just red means go. Commissioner Rob Levesque. And Commissioner Rod Underhill.
And so that is who we have with us. So missing right now tentatively is Senator Przansky. Otherwise, we're here. So welcome everyone to this commission meeting, especially on Thanksgiving week. I hope all of you have a great Thanksgiving later on. And we'll start by having Susan Amesbury give us an explanation of the new legislative rankings.
Hello, everyone. We have a number of new crimes to talk about today. And so for lack of a better idea, I thought we would go through the new crimes that are sort of wholesale new crimes, not the heavy duty controlled substance stuff first. Then we can tackle one bill 2355 that has some controlled substance stuff in it, but is largely mandatory and is classifying, just to make sure the commission wants to continue with what the legislature has directed you to do with regard to rankings and see if you want to make any person crime changes. And then we can delve into Senate Bill 302, which is the main marijuana bill that also dealt with a number of other crimes to make some amendments to those given all the changes to marijuana. And when we get into those later bills, Rob, if you want to speak up and give us a little background on what all happened with all that, since you have been a little bit involved in some fingerprints there, that would be awesome. And in our materials, I included your very helpful and excellent charts that you prepared. So look at those when we get there. Okay, so does everyone have little short-looking things like this? Hopefully you do. And my intent was to start with the one that says necessary commission action 2017 legislation other than Senate Bill 302 and 2355. The first crime on that list is the unlawful use or disclosure of information relating to delinquent debtor by a state officer or employee. This is a brand new crime. Mike and I had a little bit of discussion about it, and even though the operative date of this offense is not until July 1st, 2018, we thought it might be better for the commission to go ahead and talk about this now so we can have a rule change in effect by the time the statute starts being in effect. What this bill does.
Just on that point, one of the thought process into that was going into a short session. I'm not anticipating many statutory changes, so take care of this one now, and there's a chance we're not going to have to meet again after the short session to do this again. So otherwise we'd have to come back before this became operative, so it seemed like that makes sense.
So Senate Bill 254 was one of these collection of the debts owed to the state bills given the financial situation of the state, and one of the things the bill did was it required financial institutions to participate in a new data match system that is set up by the Department of Revenue. And once the Department of Revenue does that, all of this sensitive information is going to be transmitted by financial institutions to the Department of Revenue. And the new crime that the bill creates is a Class C felony for a person who knowingly uses or discloses information relating to a delinquent debtor that is transmitted to or from the Department of Revenue through that data match system. And the question for the commission today about this new Class C felony is, do you want to make it a person crime, and into which crime category, if any, do you want to classify it?
So I have a question. I'm trying to squint here. I'm just not. What's the minimum culpable mental state?
Person may not knowingly use or disclose.
We got to know it. And this will be disclosing personal information about tax.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of that? Just like what the law, I mean, I heard what you said, but what kind of situations are they contemplating?
Let's see, where are they going to send along? They're going to be sending along a list of delinquent debtors identified by name and social security number or other taxpayer identification number. And they're going to compare that against a list of persons who hold accounts at the financial institution to identify which of any delinquent debtors hold accounts at the financial institution. So it sounds like it would be banking.
You know, this is Greg. In speaking about making this a person crime, I'm a little troubled that it doesn't specify any harm to anybody coming from this. It specifies an improper act clearly, but it does not that I can tell, specify that anybody is harmed by this. And I would think that that would be a predicate requirement for a person crime.
And I tend to agree with Greg on that point. This drop of that. I think, however, we ought to rank it essentially just like a property. And so it depends on the map.
Oh, I don't have any. I agree with that.
Yeah. So it won't be just a complete. We won't just give it a number. We'll give it a potential range of numbers, equivalent to theft 1 or identity theft. If certain damage is done, it gets higher.
I think that's logical.
I agree with Greg. I don't see this as a person crime.
So there, just to clarify on, I get the person crime thing, and that makes sense to me. And I want to clarify about the property crime issue. So if someone wrongfully discloses a social security number, then there will need to be proof of the dollar amount of the harm that is suffered in order to determine the ranking.
In order to rank it higher. Yeah, it'll have a baseline, Yeah. And I forget what it trips up to, but basically 0 damages up to a certain point, you're in a certain box, and then if you go above that, you're in a higher box.
I think it's 2.
Yeah.
Less than $1,000.
I think it goes down to 2.
Mm-hmm.
Are the weakest ones.
I would apply the same spread to this that we currently apply for other C felony property.
Any other thoughts, commissioners?
So I do, but this is Rod Underhill, but it'll show a little bit of my lack of awareness of this, even though I should be aware of the statute. I would have benefited from, I think what you asked earlier, Chair, a little bit about when would we see this? What are a factual based circumstance that we would see this? Because my mind is maybe thinking of it a little bit different than a theft type scenario where I steal a car or I steal a pair of jeans from Fred Meyer and they've got a dollar value that I'm aware of. Because I think what we're talking about here is the release of a data point like a social security number, albeit very important, and that could result in a modest financial impact or a grave one. And then tying it into that knowing standard, how would I know that I released this social security number, which would result in millions of dollars implication versus this other one, which resulted in $100 implication. So I could be thinking of it wrong, but I would benefit from understanding better what the piece of legislation is trying to get at, what act and what actor and under what circumstances.
Is this directed at the financial institutions if they get this and then they use it, or somebody at the financial institution?
I think it's directed at state employees.
Yeah, it's a Class C felony is if it's done, if an unlawful disclosure is done by an officer or employee of the state of Oregon.
Oh, I see.
Knowing that it's for improper purposes.
Yeah.
And
Otherwise, it's just a prohibition and not a crime. If it's, there's still a prohibition on the unlawful use or disclosure, but the legislature did not make that a crime. It was a Class B felony if it was done by a state officer or employee. And they also, this isn't for the commission's purposes, necessary for classification, but the officer or employee who violates this must be dismissed from office and may not hold any public office within the state of Oregon for a period of 5 years after the date of dismissal. I think the goal is to get at the state employees, possibly at revenue or at some other agency that is somehow getting a hold of this new information that's coming in from financial institutions that would not otherwise have done so.
And is there a culpable mental state associated with the knowing of particular dollar amount? And what I mean by that is picking up on a little bit of what I was trying to communicate, and that is maybe I know my conduct is going to result in $1 million implication versus I know my conduct is going to relate to a $100 implication, or I simply don't know. And how does that?
The bill doesn't talk about that. The bill just talks about the knowing use or disclosure of the information.
So we would, if we adopted the property crimes premise of ranking, this would be a strict liability.
it would, unless we drafted the rule to say knowing. I mean, we could draft the rule to say it's a baseline of a 2, but it's a 4 if the damages are 10,000 or more, and the actor knew that it would likely result in damages of 10,000. So we could craft the rule that way if you wanted to not make it a strict liability based on damages. I'm willing to go either way.
It just strikes me that this strict liability premise would be subject to probably appropriately an attack on that. And so to the extent we move into that 2, 3, or 4, strikes me that you do have to have some.
Looked at a mental state.
Yeah.
So as we go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, we'll use the same, we call it lines, and require the actor have a knowing state of mind about that level of damage or potential damage. I don't know if that, Susan. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I get Rod's point. Greg, does that make sense to you?
Yes.
So the 2, the 0 to 1,000 level, we're not going to require a mental state, right? Because we want a baseline.
Beyond what the mental state was required.
Right, beyond the
Right.
statutory one, but we're not
So
going to.
no additional mental state.
Yeah.
So they still lose their position, all that.
So what my plan will be, as usual, when we go ahead and classify these offenses, is what I typically do is I take notes about this stuff during the meeting, then I go back and try to think up good language, and then I bring that back to you folks for you to see and talk about, and then we decide if it looks right. And that's when we make a final decision about actually adopting rules. So you'll have an opportunity to see this, and then we can talk a little bit more about, does this accurately reflect what you guys want to get at?
Okay, thank you.
And I heard not person crimes, is that what folks are concurring about?
Any other thoughts from commissioners on the phones? Okay.
Want to explain this next one and how we got here?
Why don't you do that?
It might help. So first, we're talking about the next 2 ones, and I have to bleed over into 302.
Yeah, of course,
Apologize
this,
about that.
we might even, you guys might want to take this up when you take up 302.
302.
Yeah.
Just talk about how we got here. So in 2005, I crafted a bill House Bill 2485, added meth labs to catch fire or blow up to the arson 1 and arson 2 statutes. So if you do one of these illegal plan labs and blow it up or catch fire, you're at least at arson 2. If you do really a lot of damage or if you injure someone, you can be at arson 1, depending on how it works out. Now, the trend line in Oregon has been basically we wiped out meth labs. They just don't exist anymore. I think we've had 1 incident so far this year. We used to have about 500. So those really are kind of off chart. But we have seen a real increase in our cannabis extraction labs, essentially making your own cannabis extract in your garage or your house, commonly known as BHO or butane hash oil or butane honey oil, where you're usually using some sort of a volatile chemical and or heat. And this is different than making a concentrate, which we're not talking about. That's usually using sieves, water, other things that don't catch fire, blow up. These BHO labs are catching fire and blowing up and killing people and doing the same things that meth labs did. And so I crafted a provision, Section 9 of House Senate Bill 302, to essentially carve out a new category. So these BHO labs that explode or catch fire are essentially just like, and it's the same operative language as arson 1 and arson 2. And you might ask me, well, why didn't I just go in and plug in a new paragraph into the arson 1 and arson 2 statutes? And the answer is that a high-level arson 1 meth lab explosion can have a Measure 11 mandatory minimum. And the legislature did not want to add, and I worked with Gail from OCDLA on this, the legislature absolutely did not want to increase the scope of Measure 11. So I had to draft a standalone statute that reads identically to arson 1 and arson 2, except this just applies to marijuana labs. So, and then, of course, there's 323, which gets me to this point. So Senator Olson asked me to craft the bill that takes care of everything else in the controlled substance universe. So we've got House Bill 2485 took care of meth labs, which we had a lot of, now we don't. And 302, Section 9 takes care of marijuana labs, which we now have a lot of, didn't used to. And then there's everything else in the world, and we're talking about really low numbers. Things like methylene dioxymethamphetamine, dimethyltryptamine, gamma hydroxybutyrate. We get about 1 or 2 of these clandestine labs a year. And they usually don't, they can blow up, but usually it's just 1 or 2. And so it's a real rare event. So what 323 does is it enacts another statute that reads just identically to those other 2 I described. It's all the same operative language from those other 2 statutes, but it also is not Measure 11 implicated. So as far as I'm concerned, I'll just give you my sales pitch on 323 and 302 Section 9. It should have the same exact rankings as my statute from 2005 for meth labs. And the rankings vary depending upon, what happens. If arson 1 really, except for, obviously, neither one of these 2 would have a mandatory minimum sentence because Measure 11 is not implicated. So that's my pitch on how we got to 323 as well as 302 Section 1. And I'll stop talking.
And also, just to add in, Rob, should a death result, there are already statutes on the books to handle that.
Exactly. Yeah, this was just filling the gaps is what it really was. The arson investigators wanted to see this as well as law enforcement, as well as some key legislators. So all Klan labs essentially have parity, except for the Measure 11 implication, which only applies to meth.
Why was 323 separate from marijuana?
Because I couldn't, so 302 was relating to cannabis. It's a huge bill in which I rewrote the entire marijuana offense code. And so I couldn't put that in there. So it had to be a standalone bill.
Okay. Any other commissioner thoughts?
I've got a question, if I might, Chair. And Rob, it's to you if I'm trying to tease this through. Can you think of a fact pattern that would have you charging, as a prosecutor and or grand jury, charging arson 1 pursuant to Measure 11 with the required elements, and then having another count, this arson incident to manufacture a controlled substance under a particular fact pattern? Would that ever occur?
I can't think of one off the top of my head. You might ask Greg, but really I added in 2005 that language, and it is kind of strict liability offense language for meth labs if they blow up. So that was a paragraph that specifically plugged into arson 1 and arson 2 and doesn't carry that you're knowingly, intentionally blowing up, because the cook doesn't want to blow.
Right. So
I can't think of any, Ron.
Okay. I couldn't either, but that.
I guess I guess I can think of an unlikely scenario, and that is somebody is cooking meth and distilling marijuana extract, and they manage to both blow up at the same time.
Yeah, okay, then you got two separate acts and two separate crimes. Yeah, I would agree.
But short of that bizarre law professor's hypothetical, I can't think of anything in real life.
Me either. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something. Thank you.
Okay. Any other commissioner comments or questions?
You folks haven't set out previously anything specific to the meth side of it. You have differentiation with regard to the extent of physical harm and economic loss, and then they go down from a 10. There's an 8. There's a 7, and then arson 2 starts at 6.
And I would say apply exactly the same rules and the same language, just so we have parity across the country.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Agree. Okay.
All right. Do you folks want to have that? So that's 323, both the arson 1s and arson 2s. Well, arson instant manufactured controlled substance. Arson 1 currently is all a person crime. Arson 2 is currently all not a person crime. Do you want to mirror that as well?
That makes sense to me as well.
Okay. Okay. Next up is change to assault 3. 2721, Council 2721. This is a change to assault 3, which created a new way to commit the offense of assault 3, which is recklessly. See, where are we starting on here? It's the person. The new way to do this, to commit assault 3, is intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly causing physical injury to a flagger or a highway worker while the flagger or highway worker is performing official duties. So your current assault 3, that's a Class C felony. It's a Class B felony if you do that while you're driving while under the influence of intoxicant. Class B felony of all the other ways of committing assault 3 is currently a crime category 8 and a person crime. So the question for the Class B felony is, do you want the new Class B felony about the flaggers and highway workers, do you want to classify that along with all the other Class B felony assault 3s, or split that off, and do you want to make it a person crime? And the same with the assault 3, which is just not doing it while driving under the influence. Currently a Class 6 crime category 6, and a person crime. Do you want to do the same as all the other assault 3 Class B felonies, or do you want to split this off?
Any thoughts, Commissioner Bovet?
I can't articulate a reason why we wouldn't treat it the same, but I can be swayed.
I'm inclined to think the same thing. Meaning, first, answer the question, yes, person crime.
Mm-hmm.
Second, crime category 6, unless the operator is DUII, which case it's an 8.
And assuming that, and we'll get to this later, and Rob knows about this, the driving while under the influence definition changed slightly in 302, I think.
Not true.
Is it not 302?
I'm not responsible for that one.
Something else with it changed a little bit.
Oh, you mean technically?
Yes, technically.
Yeah, because
Just technically.
we removed marijuana
Yes,
from the
exactly,
controlled
that's why.
substances act.
Yeah.
We had to
Uh-huh.
insert marijuana
Right.
into the control, the
Yeah.
813. We'll get to that.
Yeah, so even though, because that is just a technical change, my assumption, which you folks confirm, is that you don't want to change anything in this bill relating to driving under the influence, despite that technical change. Because in theory.
Well, the new definition of Dewey will be what this bill operates off of,
Correct. Yes,
right?
yes.
So just for commissioners following along, looking at the grid, an 8 makes this an optional prison sentence for the judge. Presumptively could be a prison sentence, so that's a discretionary thing, whereas 6, assuming, of course, that you have little to no criminal history. And then a 6 would make it a probation sentence. Same assumption, little to no criminal history. So that's what the significance of the 6 to 8 changes.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so I'm hearing, keep it the same as all the other assault 3, so just incorporate it into what we've already got.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Operation of unmanned aircraft system, House Bill 3047. We, a few years ago, dealt with this as a misdemeanor, or we, the commission, dealt with this as just a misdemeanor, where there had been a new misdemeanor offense about drones, creating a new Class A misdemeanor for a person intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly operated an unmanned aircraft system capable of firing a bullet or projectile or otherwise operated as an unmanned aircraft system in a manner that caused the system to function as a dangerous weapon. And since it was a Class misdemeanor, the only question in front of the commission at that time was, do you classify it as a person misdemeanor? And you folks did not. Now, we have kept that kept that misdemeanor, which is not a person misdemeanor, added another way to commit it. It's reckless, knowingly, intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly operating or causing to be operated an unmanned aircraft system. Still have a Class A misdemeanor, which is new because of those changes, and a Class B felony and a Class B felony added. The Class C felony is if you intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly operate an unmanned aircraft system to fire a bullet or projectile, or otherwise operate the unmanned aircraft system in a manner that causes the system to function as a dangerous weapon, Class C felony. The Class B felony is if you intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly operate an unmanned aircraft system to fire a bullet or projectile, same as above, and it causes serious physical injury to another person. That makes it a Class B felony.
I have a question. This is Greg. Does the Class C felony require that it be over non-private land, or this is the same illegality whether you do it over a shopping mall or your own 1,000-acre ranch?
There are a number of exceptions. If you use it to discharge a non-lethal projectile for purposes other than injuring or killing persons or animals, using it for non-recreational purposes in compliance with specific authorization from the FAA, if you notify the Department of Aviation, the state police, and any other agency that issues a permit about your use and when you're going to do it.
Okay, that satisfies my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Because there are legitimate uses for that type of thing in agriculture.
Right.
That was the point I was getting
Yeah.
to.
Could you scroll up on the House bill one more time, please? I was looking at the Class C felony section. So the first part that intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly operates an unmanned aircraft system to fire a bullet, which seems like a significant act. But then the second part is, or otherwise operates an unmanned aircraft system in a manner that causes the system to function as a deadly weapon, which, I mean, frankly, any of those things operated dangerously could be a dangerous weapon. So it seems like the first half of it is very important, whereas the second half, to me, seems like that could incorporate a lot of different things. I'm a little bit conflicted about how to separate those two.
I don't know why the legislature did it that way, and I invite the other great legal minds on the panel who have a lot of experience in criminal law to talk about what the difference is between the Class A misdemeanor, operator causing to be operated as a dangerous weapon, and the one that's the Class B felony. If you take, if it's otherwise operating, taking out the firing the bullet or projectile, there's the otherwise operating. It sort of sounds like that's the misdemeanor, but
So if someone's operating a drone that's capable of firing, even though it may not be loaded, or whatever, is that an A misdemeanor? So let's say they're just flying something that it does something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems to me that what that's getting at is when you're using the drone as a weapon itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're flying it into somebody.
This is that's capable of firing a bullet, not
Yeah,
Were we
that's-
talking about 1 or 2?
number one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It just says,
One is the A misdemeanor.
capable of firing a bullet.
okay,
So it had a gun, but it didn't have a bullet in it.
so that is a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
Yes. And then the
And
felony,
B would be has a gun and has a bullet in it, but it didn't fire.
B is if you do fire a bullet or projectile,
but you
or otherwise operate an unmanned aircraft system in a manner that causes it to function as a dangerous weapon.
Lasers, for example.
Yes. And then the B felony is,
Seriously.
so in other words, the C felony can include missing, you fire and miss. It can include you fire and cause injury, albeit only physical injury, right?
Right.
There are other potential charges outside of the statute that you would look at as well, but that's the difference.
What about if
Well, yeah,
flying it and then they accidentally crash it?
Because if here you have to intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly operate it so as to function as a dangerous weapon. So you're, like, for example, you're
so if you
flying-
accidentally do it,
Yeah, you're using it as a
so
weapon.
pure accident wouldn't be covered.
Yeah, it wouldn't be covered at all. Under 2.
So,
Right, but under 2, I mean, essentially the propellers are knives. I mean, they could function as it. How could they not be a dangerous weapon? If you get it
Yeah.
close to somebody, it would be a dangerous weapon under all circumstances.
well, this is in a manner that causes the system to function as a dangerous weapon. I read causes as it actually becomes a dangerous weapon as opposed to potentially could become a dangerous weapon.
Oh, I
In other
see.
words- Yeah, in other words, baseball bats are baseball bats unless or until they're used to hit somebody. Then they move into the category of a dangerous weapon having been caused to perform that weapon type function as opposed to hit a baseball.
Yeah.
So that presumes injury?
But it doesn't, you can swing,
No,
you
not
can
at
swing a
that level.
baseball bat at somebody's head and miss, and it's still being used as a dangerous weapon.
Sure.
That's what it seems to be getting at, is that essentially.
Well, we're talking about attempted assault, basically, right?
Yeah, that's why I say other statutes would be implicated, in addition to the use of.
Right. Right, attempted assault, attempted murder, there's all sorts of other charges potentially.
So to my mind, this is Rod Underhill talking. First, to answer the question, should 2B and C be person crimes? The answers are yes and yes, in my opinion, for the reasons we're talking about. The 2B most similar to me reflects the ORS, I think it's 161610 UUW, unlawful use of a weapon.
Mhm.
Language is similar in nature. That's a person felony. It's also ranked as a 6, which is where I'm inclined to think this should be. And then C, that is the actual firing of the bullets and the actual causing of serious physical injury. And so certainly a person felony and moves into the crime category of 8 to me. And depending on its level of intentionality and other kind of culpability, you can have these other statutes are implicated.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we would keep the A misdemeanor as a non-person crime, correct? Under your scenario, Rod?
You know, short answer is I suppose. Part of me was I didn't weigh in. You know, I wasn't involved in this conversation back when that ranking was made. I understand that the capability of firing is different from the actual firing. I get that the It can cause a system to function as a dangerous weapon, means a swing and a miss is close to a menacing, but menacing is a person misdemeanor, right? So I don't know what the thinking was when it was ranked as a non-person misdemeanor. Strikes me that you could argue either way.
I'd say one is that it should be a person.
What's a unlawful possession of a firearm? I mean, is that a person?
Well, that's several theories. That could simply be unlawful carrying a firearm in a vehicle without a permit.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Which is a little bit like this. And I mean, when I see that, I see, well, you got to do a function check. Is it capable of firing? And it's kind of analogous to that.
Well, this is Greg. I would support what Rod laid out if we kept the amisto as a non-person. Because I think what Rod said about the other two made sense to me.
You know, this is Sebastian, and I can't imagine why somebody would be strapping a gun onto one of these unmanned crafts other than to fire it. I think that if law enforcement was to find something like that, they would probably want to treat it as a person crime, and I think I'm leaning towards changing that as well.
So Mr. Schmidt, are you looking up the UPW? Because I think that's a good question. I'm just not recalling whether it's person or non.
So,
Unlawfully directing a laser pointer is a person.
Yeah, and so that's,
so what if you load this thing up and you're in some rock pit, you know, out in the middle of nowhere, and you're gonna just target practice with it or try to see where does that fall? At least that would be a likely scenario.
Wouldn't that be Section 2B that they're actually firing it?
Yep. That would be a C felony under this new statute,
Right.
which seems a bit much to me under the chair scenario. It seems pretty harsh if you have no evil intent.
No, I think for a lot of reasons, we don't want people strapping guns onto unmanned crafts.
Well,
I just want to get that out there, see if there's thoughts about that, because that's,
well, while I track, I don't know if that's our question for us.
Yeah.
So, when one
Right.
does do what the statute reads,
right.
yeah, what is it a person crime and is what crime category? And so the person crime, yeah, we're talking about firing of a bullet and or causes it to be used as a dangerous weapon, which is quite similar to the UUW statute, which is a Class C felony, person felony.
what part are you speaking about? A, B, or C?
Sorry, for the moment, I was talking about 2B, because I think that's what our chair's example was, the target.
I
practice.
understand.
I also, I suppose, just from making a record standpoint, I would like to think that, you know, prosecutors around the state, law enforcement officers around the state would look at that conduct as different than flying over an urban neighborhood and doing something similar to it. It'd be looked at certainly differently relative to.
Right.
I mean, the problem,
Yeah, I'm sure.
I agree with everything Rod said about 2B and C. I'm really struggling with one now that I've read it a few times, because I can come up with scenarios where to me it clearly is person crimes, and other scenarios where it's clearly not. And that's when I'm struggling.
Yeah, same here. I would suggest if it's that easy to come up with scenarios where it's not a person crime, we shouldn't go out on that kind of limb, if you will. I think we should leave it as a non-person for the a misdemeanor offense.
Rob, would you give us one of your examples that you think is clearly not a person crime in Section 1?
Well, just the one that was given. You're out there in the middle of the woods. There's a rock pit that goes down in, and you're experimenting, and you're flying it down into this rock. There's nobody around. There's just you.
Right.
So there's no person to potentially injure.
And it's not even loaded.
Is it possible to
Right.
leave that
Yeah, 'cause it's-
unranked, I guess, as a misto? Well, we need to plug it into one.
Yeah, I don't think that the court, I don't think there's a provision for the court
court
making it
still-
a person crime or not a person crime,
Yeah.
unlike the rankings.
The rankings, yeah, so I guess I'm willing to go along with non-person misdemeanor on 1, and then, person felonies on 2, B, and C, with B being a 6 and C being an 8.
Agreed.
I would concur.
As well, yeah, I agree.
Likewise.
I'll go along with it.
Thank you, everybody. That's a good discussion.
Good. Now we are to a set of bills that only have the person misdemeanor designation. We don't have to talk about crime categories anymore for this next couple, 3 or 4. We just have, person crime misdemeanors to talk about. The first one is Senate Bill 257, which changes the crime of official misconduct. And this reads to me like sort of a tail end to Senate Bill 1515 thing, if any of you remember the Multnomah County folks from Give Us This Day and all that stuff that happened a year or 2 ago. This adds a new way of committing official misconduct in the first degree, which is where you, in essence, commit official misconduct in the second degree, and you're aware of and consciously disregard the fact that the violation of the law creates a risk of physical injury to a vulnerable person, the commission of a sex crime against a vulnerable person, the withholding from a vulnerable person of necessary and adequate food, physical care, or medical attention. Vulnerable person.
Here's the
Yeah. Go ahead, Greg.
first. The defense lawyer will be the first to suggest that ought to be a person designation.
I'll second that as a prosecutor. Agreed. Yeah, this resembles our reckless endangering statute.
Yeah.
And which is a person misdemeanor.
Okay.
Yeah. It's funny how the older I get, I see things differently.
Okay, so are we all comfortable with that one? Keeping
Yeah.
the rest of person
Yeah.
crime, making the new subsection of person crime, okay. Moving on then to Senate Bill 493, which creates a new way of committing assault 4. The new way of committing assault 4 is with criminal negligence causing serious physical injury to another who is a vulnerable user of a public way by means of a motor vehicle. All of these are currently person crimes, assault 4s. Do you want to make that new subsection C a person crime as well?
What's an example of that?
Well, I'll give you one.
Yeah.
So I helped craft this.
Please, talk to us about it.
Well, in its original form, it really was looking quite significantly at the vulnerable user of a public way being pedestrians and or cyclists, who were currently, there is a gap in the statute. Well, up until this passage, there was a gap surrounding a reckless standard in causing serious physical injury, as opposed to the criminal negligence. And so we had a gap where we found ourselves unable to charge certain conduct that was not quite accident, but instead was criminal negligence, but the criminal negligence standard deals with a gross deviation from the standard of care. When this was crafted, it teased out the flagger, which we just addressed. We disentangled those two, created different statutes. This really does address the pedestrian. It addresses cyclists. There was a situation where Mr. Croquet, I believe it was cycling down the road. His leg was taken off in a tragic car accident where criminal negligence did occur by the driver. He had serious physical injury. He lost his leg. He was a vulnerable user of the public way. He was a cyclist riding down the road, and it was a motor vehicle involved. And the criminal justice system could do nothing to address that circumstance surrounding the criminal negligence culpable mental state. Had he engaged in reckless, knowing or intentional yes, the grand jury would have indicted him, I believe. That was not the case. It was criminal negligence. This fills the gap. But should be, I believe, a person class A misdemeanor.
Thank you.
Vulnerable use of a public way is also a defined term, and like Rod says, it does get at pedestrians and cyclists. It also gets at skateboarders, roller skaters, inline skaters, scooter riders, and farm tractor implements of husbandry riders.
Rod, do we have other examples in our criminal code of mental states less than reckless that result in a person conviction?
We do. They're actually found in this assault 4 statute, I believe. If we scroll down, they use the criminally negligent discharge of a firearm. We don't see them very.
Oh, right.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, it's right in front of me there in sub 1B with criminal negligence causes injury to another. Yeah.
And DUI is a
okay, that answers.
Person crime makes sense to me.
Yeah, no argument for me.
Bill 2598 creates a new way to commit vehicular assault. And the new way to commit vehicular assault used to be simply recklessly operating a vehicle upon a highway in a manner that results in contact between the person's vehicle and a bicycle operated by a person or a person operating a bicycle. Now we've added in motorcycles operated by a person, persons operating motorcycles, passenger on a motorcycle, a pedestrian. And there's a requirement that the contact causes physical injury to the person operating the motorcycle or the passenger on the motorcycle. And it's class A misdemeanor. And I did not see that this offense of vehicular assault was already a person crime. I looked a couple of times and it did not look to be to me. So the question is, do you want to make any or all of this a person crime?
Any discussion? Huh?
Well, what did the discussion in the Judiciary Committee channel, how did they go on all this? Did they talk about it?
So this is Rod Underhill, and I don't know the answer to that question. So if anyone else does, please volunteer. But I look at my eyes are going to the mental states and the elements. So the mental state of recklessly coupled with physical injury is essentially the two main components of our assault 4 theory, right? You have knowingly, intentionally, or recklessly causes physical injury, and that's assault 4, and that's a person misdemeanor. Here we have those elements: recklessly, contact causes physical injury. So I think it equates to the same thing. I'm not sure you wouldn't double count it, for example. I mean, if you had this scenario that I'm looking at, it would both be a violation of 811-060, but also 163.160 assault 4. In most instances, I would believe.
That makes sense.
But yeah, the both would be person misdemeanors.
Sounds like we have somewhat consensus that would be a person crime.
And do you want to have the whole thing person crime or just the new stuff person crime?
The whole thing, I imagine.
Yeah.
I agree, because it looks as if the couple of mental state reckless and the element of physical injury existed originally, and then the new aspects don't change that.
Just checking in. This is Dwayne. Are you guys able to hear me when I speak?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if you heard me just a minute ago. I think I had it muted on the computer and the phone. So did you hear me just a moment ago when I spoke?
No.
No.
Okay. So I just discovered I have to unmute the computer and the phone both. So I sat through the Judiciary Committee on this, and it was my understanding that we were expecting the entire thing to be considered a person crime. At least that's my recollection of it. So.
Well, we got to the right place then.
All right. So, sorry, I was so slow to chime in. I'm learning the dual technology here.
It'll change just after you learn it.
All right, so we have two more to go on this chart. Second to last one is House Bill 2988, which is a new way of committing misdemeanor harassment. But this one, you are required to classify as a person class A misdemeanor. So the question is only, do you want to go along with what the legislature has mandated you to do, which is to classify as a person A misdemeanor the offense of subjecting another person to offenses of physical contact, and the victim of the offense is a household member and is committed in the immediate presence of the minor child or stepchild, and all those good elements that you can see there.
So I'm not opposed personally to civil disobedience, but I'm not gonna do it on this.
Okay.
Let's do what the legislature told us to do.
I would concur.
I agree with the legislature's desire to have us categorize the same.
Okay. And the last one here is the new offense of supplying false information to ODOT in connection with a certification. House Bill 3264 creates a new pilot program that ODOT is going to conduct in order to promptly pay their contracts. And they are required by this new law to promptly pay their invoices within 15 days if the contractor certifies to the department that the contractor is a small business, and then there's requirements what certification has to have in it. And the new crime is a person who knowingly submits false information to ODOT in connection with the certification that they are a small business in order to get the prompt payment is a Class A misdemeanor. And if someone thinks that ought to be a person crime, then you can talk about it.
So this was Representative Gomberg's bill, and I can't dream of how we can make this a person crime. It's clearly a property crime.
I agree.
Mhm.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay.
You want me to give an introduction on this one?
Please do. I would love it if you would.
Okay, so Senate Bill 302 was a multi-year project to completely rewrite the entire marijuana offense code. So it's a big, thick bill, but I think to help, I can break it out into two parts. Parts where we should spend some real time and parts where I think it's pretty darn easy. So one of the things that Senate Bill 302 did, among others, is it removed marijuana from the State Controlled Substances Act entirely, and treats it as a regulated substance, kind of like alcohol, and they kind of and so the first roughly 10 sections of the bill are the substance. That's where we really change things related to possession of marijuana, delivery of marijuana, manufacture of marijuana. The arson one we've already decided on, section 9. That's where we made some real substantive changes at our work group. The rest of the bill is really conforming amendments. It's just, I had to recodify all kinds of statutes that exist in ORS 475A, the Controlled Substances Act, or 475, and had to essentially plug them into 302 because they wouldn't otherwise exist. So I think the first 10 sections we ought to have some real conversation about, although like we've already decided 9. But the rest should be real easy because my deference is going to be just apply what we got in 475. Whatever we've done with a comparable statute in 475 is exactly how we should treat it under this one. So that's my lead-in introduction, if that helps. Because I know you're looking at like all these pages, and I'm sorry, but I had to recodify all this stuff. So. Excellent
summary, and I would also point out that a number of the Senate Bill 302 offenses, not all of them, but some of them already have crime categories attached to them in the bill itself. So.
And I just copied them right out of ORS 475.
Which makes perfect sense, exactly right, yeah. So we'll mirror that. So there's a number of these where it will just be, do you want to do what the legislature told you you to do, and then do you want to make it a person crime? And there aren't many current person crimes that are controlled substance or marijuana person crimes. So it would be kind of a thing to elevate one that isn't. But your first, when I put these things together in the chart like this, I just went through section by section 302 to see if there was something that we needed to talk about in it. So we're just kind of going through the bill in order.
So again, I think what we're really looking at is page 1 and 2. We've already ranked 9 and 9A,
Right.
the equivalent arson ones, and I would just urge everybody to kind of run through pages, what would it be, 4 through the end, and Susan, thank you, you plugged in all the 475 references, and I would just say treat them exactly the same, because all those are just conforming amendments, and they weren't designed to do anything substantively different. And if you wanted to do something different, we probably ought to do something different in 475 too. So I don't know that we need to laboriously go through all those other pages. I think we just give Susan direction to treat them the same. And then, but we really need to talk about pages 1 and 2.
So let's talk about page 1 and 2.
Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, go ahead. Greg, did you have something to say?
No, I'm in agreement with what Rob just outlined.
Excellent. Okay, section 3 is unlawful possession of a marijuana item. The legislation requires it to be crime category 1 unless it is a commercial marijuana offense, in which case it is a crime category 8. And for the C felony, for the A misdemeanor, of course, there's no crime category. So the question is, do you want to follow the required felony crime category, and do you want to make either of these things a person crime? The only person crime right now in the 475 arena is that unlawful administration of a controlled substance 1. That's the only misdemeanor drug offense that's currently a person crime. And there's one potential drug offense, commercial drug offense, that is manufacturing and delivering a Schedule 4 controlled substance, thereby causing death to a person. Rob, do you know why it's Schedule 4?
Why, what is it?
I've always wondered why 475, 752 is manufacturing or delivering a Schedule 4 controlled substance, thereby causing death to a person.
Yeah, so that was the Senator Brzezinski bill a few sessions ago, designed to fill a gap in state unbiased law. So we had this problem with Schedule 4s not actually being able to get to a more severe. So that was plugged into the same bill that we actually authorized the Board of Pharmacy to reduce marijuana from Schedule 1 and the state CSA. Same bill, we plugged them both into the same one. So that's the history of that.
Okay.
So my take on Section 3, which is just the new PCS marijuana, is we just treat it exactly the same as we treated PCS marijuana before. I don't really see any substantive differences. We did noodle around with all the operative language, but it really doesn't change anything that you've got charted out here from my perspective.
I agree. So that would be not non-person crimes for unlawful possession of a marijuana item, but following the legislative requirements for the person crime category. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
And that would maintain consistency in 475.
Exactly. We have the same thing with Section 4, which is unlawful possession of a marijuana item by a person under 21.
Yep.
So we can do the same thing with that, if you folks want, which would be, once again, you're required to have it be a crime category 1 unless it's a commercial marijuana offense, in which case it's crime category 8. And then the question is, do you want any of the unlawful possession of marijuana items by a person under 21 to be a person crime? I don't think the other ones are, so.
I don't see any reason to make any crimes.
Greg,
We're talking about this, you just said it would not be one. Is that correct, Rob?
Right.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Unlawful delivery of a marijuana item. You're required to classify the Class C felony as a crime category 4 unless it's a commercial marijuana offense, in which case it's a crime category 8. Does anyone want to make any of the ways of committing unlawful delivery of marijuana item person
outside of the one referenced, where, let's see, where a death took person. So I just want to maybe finish that thought. So it's essentially it's keeping it the same, but it's only a person crime if results in death. Right?
Exactly. And that's the way the 475.
Yeah, and the death is in a separate statute, right?
Right.
It's not in this particular one.
I think we're all saying the same thing. I just wanted to double check in case I would.
No, I did noodle around to satisfy various people in terms of how all the details read, the cutoff points, but the substance really didn't change.
Same thing with the manufacturer.
I did condense the statute a bit, so there's not as many subs as there used to be, but again, it's more noodling around with cutoff points and things. And I think we just apply the same rules that we had in 475.
Which would be 2 non-person crimes and the mandatory crime category.
Yep. And then we've already done section 9, and then I don't know if everybody wants to look, starting on page 4 through all the rest. Certainly willing to listen to arguments as to why we should treat any of these different than we treat the equivalent 475 offenses, but there certainly wasn't any intent that I'm aware of, legislative intent to create any different standards. These are all just copied verbatim on 475.
Section 15 changed a little bit, importing, exporting.
Indeed, yeah, okay, good point.
So let me run through. 11 and 12 are all mandatory. Crime category 8 person crime, crime category 9 person crime, crime category 9 person crime. So I'd imagine you guys want to do what you're required to do with 11 and 12, which is causing another person to ingest marijuana and intentionally administering a marijuana item to the body of another person who's under 18 years of age.
But you're right, section 15.
Section 15 is a little different.
We did some substance.
So let's talk about that.
So it did a couple of things. The most important thing there is the definition of export. So essentially the crime is completed of unlawfully exporting marijuana or marijuana item if you give it to a third-party carrier once it's in the hands of a third-party carrier. So for example, if I go to the Portland airport with a luggage piece of 50 pounds of marijuana, I put it in the luggage rack and United Airlines takes it. The crime is complete. It doesn't have to actually get on the airplane and leave. I can put it in the mail, and the mail catches it before it leaves the state. The export crime is now completed. So that is, thanks for pointing that out, that's a standard difference that we changed. And then if you scroll down a little bit.
So we've taken attempted export and said that's enough for export.
Exactly.
More or less.
Yeah, more or less. That's exactly what we've done. That's exactly right. And we talked about void deliveries at the time when I was crafting that. And then you'll see down further, I did more noodling around in terms of where you draw a line. So I tried to maintain consistency. So all of these lines drawn in, where the cutoff points are between misdemeanors and felonies and the upper level felonies, is so it mirrors the same cutoff points that you have in the PCS statute, the MCS statute, and the DCS, so we weren't creating all of these different standards. So fundamentally, I think the crime remains the same, except for, as Greg very succinctly put, essentially converts attempted export to completed export.
What is it on the other crimes?
Where do we rank this?
4.
Yeah.
You ranked it a 4 if it was a licensee.
Right.
Otherwise, it wasn't ranked.
Yeah, and and so I think we need to maintain a higher level of ranking for licensees because that's just a really bad deal. So,
Yeah, so the question is, like looking at what's on the screen.
Well, none of these, first off, none of these are person misdemeanors.
Right.
I think everybody can agree. None of this is person.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, what if you're really exporting, you're not a licensee, and you're exporting a lot of marijuana products out of the state? What is that worth to us? We got it as.
That would be up to the,
the judge, is what we
Wouldn't
left it.
Mhm.
And we intentionally decided to leave it up to the judge last time, because I think Greg and I had a back and forth, as I recall, where came up with a myriad of possibilities, and there was just no way to confine this box. And if we put, my opinion remains the same, if we put a line to it, put a number to it, we're gonna hit some people harder than they should be, and hit some people not nearly as hard as they should be.
yeah, I remember that discussion, and I think it's applicable here as you do.
So I think we just leave all the felonies in the statute unranked by design, and we treat all of the misdemeanors as non-personal.
You ranked the licensee one, the capital A there is a 4 last time.
Right.
So do you want to rank that as a 4 this time, and then be a C in essence, unranked? Or?
Exactly.
Should non-licensees be capped below a 4, or since you said licensees are the ones we should take most seriously? Or just have, it can run the gamut?
I think it's just to run the gamut.
You know, 4, although it tells us in yellow code that it's prison crime category, it's 12 months and under, so it's actually not.
It's not.
And the idea
These are all
that,
These are all non-prison.
non-prison.
Yeah.
right, which is why I was just asking on a non-licensee, if you could go higher than a 4, you could find yourself in prison where licensees basically almost can never find them.
Well, and you know, and you got a point to that. I would even be supportive of getting rid of the rankings we put on the licensee, because remember, we put that on the licensee way back when the Measure 91, that was like 2 iterations of rewriting this darn statute, because I think I've rewritten this thing 3 times now. And I think we ought to remove the 4. And the example is this huge thing that we just saw in Kansas or Nebraska or whatever, it was a licensee, and it was like millions of dollars worth of extract. And I think we ought to unrank the whole darn thing, because it can run the gamut. It can run just your little Joe Schmo, you know, taking 10 pounds of bud over to his cousins in Kansas, all the way up to what we saw in the papers the other day, and OLCC has already suspended his license, where he's literally moving literally a semi-truckload worth of product to another state with the design to sell massive amounts of it for a lot of money. So I think we unrank the whole darn thing.
We'll leave it up to the court.
Mm-hmm.
I'll support that.
Yeah, I mean, leaving it unranked protects the defense's interests in the small guy, as well as protecting the prosecutor's interests in the semi-truck guy. I think it works for everybody.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Does it cause, you know, any kind of disparate, shockable, where you have one judge really lays it onto a little guy?
Well, whenever you
Very
unrank,
non-licensee,
whenever you
that
unrank,
worries me.
yeah, whenever you unrank anything, then you have that potential. But I just think the nature of this offense is so sweeping and variable that I don't know any way to rank around it unless we actually go in and create a multi-tiered rule around drawing lines at the volume, maybe somehow. And we could do that if we wanted to really, I think if we saw that become an issue, we could go in and create this really long rule but you'd have to do it for every category of marijuana item, because there's a ton of them. So you have to say over this amount of concentrates, or over this amount of, you know, then move them all around that way. We could certainly do that. I want some time about where those lines should be drawn, but
Give some sort of,
Here's a small suggestion. Maybe we ask staff to tickle this in a year or a year and a half, and then ask ODAA and OCDLA if either group has complaints about what's happened with the unrankedness of this, and then deal with it if we choose to, if there's some perceived miscarriages.
I think that's a good idea. I think that would satisfy my question.
I'd support
Yeah.
that too. So unranked and non-personal.
non-person. Gotcha,
for the whole statute.
okay.
Is there anything else I forgot that I questioned?
There's one or two that have sort of new elements to them, but we'll just zip forward on section 29 and 30 are two 475 offenses. I'm skipping 752 because that's changed in 2355. So the 302 version of it isn't the correct version of it. Currently 475-908, you have requirements, crime category 8 M-person crime for the B felony, 9 M-person crime for the A felony, assuming you want to continue with your mandatory required classification, even though the definition of ingest has now been removed, or marijuana smoke has been removed from it.
There's no element in the crime definition that requires that the young person be objecting, is there?
No.
In other words, ought it be a person crime if somebody underage asks for a controlled substance and somebody else doesn't check ID? That seems to me a different scenario from holding a kid down and giving it, you know what I mean, administering drugs, which is obviously a person crime.
Yeah, I mean, there's two separate ones that you mentioned. There's causing another person to ingest, which I think of most typically as spiking something, where there's no knowledge.
Well, I agree that would be a person crime.
Yeah, right. And that's what 475-908 gets to. And all we did to that I just removed marijuana from the statute and then rewrote the statute in the marijuana code for marijuana only. But I did create a new exception to intentional application, section 30. And the new exception I did create was for youth that have a medical marijuana card. So their caregivers can help. Previously, believe it or not, it was a pretty significant felony for a caregiver to assist a youth cardholder with their marijuana. And I know quite a number of parents who use CBD oil to treat their children's seizures. Technically, that was a pretty significant crime. So I did carve out an exception for that type of activity. So those folks are now protected. So my take on these is, again, I'll just repeat myself. These all ought to stay just the same as they are in 475.
Craig, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I'm still uncomfortable with section 30 being a person crime under all circumstances, without there being an out for unless done at the request of the person under 18 or something like that. I mean, I don't know, because these are pretty serious crimes. We're not talking about, these are prison crimes at the high end of it, at any rate, and it seems, I don't know, it seems pretty weak to me for a person crime at the low end of this offense. Maybe I'm the only one who sees it that way.
What would be an example of the lower version? A 19-year-old is out with a 17-year-old and they do something.
Yes, exactly. A 19-year-old and a 17-year-old are out and they go outside the pub, and the 19-year-old, the 17-year-old says, can I have a hit off your joint? The 19-year-old says, sure, and hands it to him. And there's, it doesn't say, let me see your driver's license to make sure you're 18 before I share my joint with you. That seems harsh to be calling that a person crime in my worldview.
Well, marijuana's not in this anymore, right, Ron?
Not in this particular section, but I recodified that in 302 elsewhere. and then carved out the complete exception for OMA cardholders. So I thought there was something else that applied in this. It's been a while since I've looked at the statute. Is there a subsequent? I need the ORS book.
Yeah. So, yeah, intentionally administering a marijuana item to the body of another person who's under 18 in section 12
Right.
is required to be a crime category 9 and required to be a person crime.
And I believe that's true for 475, 910 as well.
I don't have those required to be a person crime.
Yeah, is it administering, just giving it to them if they ask for it, like Greg said?
Yeah, but I don't, again, Susan, I need to find that because I don't recall inventing that.
Inventing.
For section 12 or whatever it was, you know, the mandatory requirement. I think I just took it right out of 475.
Oh, yeah, I bet you did, yeah.
So that's what I'm looking for, what tells us what we have to do with 475, 910. Where the heck is that?
425, 910, sub 1 tells us it's a crime category 9. Sub 2 tells us a crime category 8.
Yeah, right there. So it's built right in there, yeah. So that's a crime category.
It's a crime category.
Yeah. So the question is, what do we do with person? But those are, you're telling me right now, those are all person.
Those are all person
crimes.
right now. Yes,
In 475.
yes. So the 910 is all person.
Are we?
In other words, it's all person with other drugs aside from cannabis, right? And we're talking about what to do with cannabis.
No, right here, apparently we're talking about revisiting that for everything but cannabis.
You don't need to.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah.
Usually you say stick with the same thing. But if
I
there's a
mean-
reason you want to revisit it now that cannabis has been removed.
I just don't see that removing.
Is there a distinction between, I don't have my code book in front of me. Is there a distinction between the crime category levels where consent changes from one crime category to another as you go up the scale?
Well, not in the statute. I guess the question you pose could be, I guess we could divide this up and treat all these as a non-person crime if the child consented.
That would be
Down to a certain age.
And I wouldn't. I was just going to say I was going to put a bottom age on that because we don't want 11-year-olds having the ability to consent to taking drugs. I don't know what the age would be, but there ought to be an age.
I have a colleague in my office from our criminal justice division who just came over to our section, who when he heard I was working on this said, let me tell you about the background of the statute. I was involved in ODA when this was being put together. So I was not, but this is what was retrieved from me. It said the factual background of 475, 910, as he told me, was that it involved a 17-year-old kid who was going around with some 30-year-olds in one of the southern counties. And they were partying, and these 30-something-year-olds were injecting him. And he came home having been injected, looked kind of off. His mom asked him if he was okay. He said, yeah. And then the neighbors reported seeing him running across the back 40 out to the woods where he died in the cold. And they weren't able to charge any kind of murder or anything like that, but the mom really wanted murder. And since she could not get murder, she came and was asking for some kind of legislative fix that would give a stronger, more powerful tool to use against folks who did this to her kid, but that was the genesis of having it be this.
And I think that fact pattern deserves a prison sentence the same way everyone else in the room does. I'm talking about the other extreme covered by this statute that I've mentioned already at least once, that I, don't think ought to be a person crime. And so if we can carve out something about other than consent other than the minor consenting as long as the minor is X years of age, as somebody suggested, that would you know, satisfy my concerns.
This is Sebastian. Sorry.
Well, what about, could we put in something that, less causes death or serious physical injury, can you add those? Like you do on assault crimes, I'm just throwing this out,
Well, so this is Rod Underhill. It strikes me, the phrase, I haven't used it yet, but in my mind I said stare decisis several times about historically this has been a certain way, and short of compelling arguments, doesn't seem like we should change a ranking from either a person or a category. And what it strikes me as many of these conversations deal with those ought to go back to the legislature for substantive changes, such as if they intend to include words such as consent, or if they intend to look at is there a cause of physical injury or a risk of serious physical injury, or those kinds of things. Those ought to be legislated, in my mind. And so the removal of marijuana from this consideration and the retention of it as what it has been historically strikes me as a way that I think I default to, absent compelling arguments otherwise. And go ahead. I'll stop.
Go ahead.
This is Sebastian. I've got a question for any of the criminal practitioners. Are there any laws in which a person under the age of 18 has the capacity to consent?
That sexual assault.
Yeah, there's a number of, an exception earlier in 475 where if it's pursuant to a prescription, of course. So those are all exceptions to this. And then I did carve out a new exception for Oregon Medical Marijuana Act cardholders that are used to consent, and then accepted out this statute from that in section 12 or whatever it was earlier. So those would be the exceptions that I'm aware of, whether there's a prescription or where there's medical marijuana involved with the cardholder.
Then you get to the sex laws where there's less than 3 years difference. There's an assumption of consent there.
Yeah, but and that got carried over because that only applied to marijuana. So it got pulled out of this statute and plugged into the other one. So that'll be in the other one as well. But I also created another exception for people that are any age. You could have a 50-year-old helping a 15-year-old cardholder, and that would not be an offense anymore at all.
So as it relates to this statute in its current iteration, the person crimes relate to Schedules 1, 2, and 3, and are not including marijuana, right?
Yeah, because we're no longer a controlled substance in Oregon.
So as a practical matter, what we're talking about is heroin.
Right.
What we're talking about is methamphetamine. We're talking about cocaine. What else?
Opioids.
Well, it's 4 and 5 too, because
it does cover.
felony and
Yeah, but those are non-person crimes.
Those are person crimes. All these are person
All 4 of
crimes.
these are.
Yeah.
And the class A misdemeanor is a person misdemeanor.
I mean, to be honest, Oregonians really only abuse 4 substances. You just listed them off. Everything else doesn't amount to hill beans.
And so, my personal vote is to retain it. I don't think there's a compelling argument to make the change, and that's what I kind of been looking for. I followed that in my own mind as far as my votes have gone. And to the extent we think there are aspects of the statute that ought to include certain other considerations, I think that should be legislated.
I'll just say that as staff of the commission, people reach out to us from time to time with comments on how things are playing out and whether or not rules should be changed. And I've never had anyone come to me since I've been in the CJC for the last 4 years and say that this is not playing out the way that they thought in the courtroom, or that it's an unjust result or anything. So keeping it as the status quo. I haven't heard anyone, I guess I'm saying I haven't heard anyone saying it's not working or that it ought to be changed. And I typically probably would be the person that people would turn to make that comment for what that's worth.
I'm kind of with Rod. I don't see a compelling reason to readdress this issue right now because of this bill, that section 30 was just intended to remove marijuana from that particular statute, if nothing more.
I agree as well.
Any other discussion? It sounds like we at least have a majority consensus to go with this. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Also, just to follow up on my point, we are about to enter the rulemaking process, so anybody could comment in this period and weigh in and say, you know what, I actually do think you should change that. So keeping it the status quo does not mean that we will end up there necessarily.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a notice process, or there'll be proposed rules that are sent out for folks to review and comment on. They can get comments back, and they may present evidence or thoughts that would compel the commission to change. Okay, section 43, criminal mistreatment 1. The felony, which is currently a crime category 7 and a person crime. The bill added a new way to commit this crime, which is, let's see, the person having in violation of legal duty to provide care for a dependent person or an elderly person and having assumed to be permanent or temporary care, custody, or responsibility for the supervision of the dependent person or elderly person, intentionally or knowingly leaves the dependent person or elderly person or causes the dependent person or elderly person to enter or remain in or upon premises where a cannabinoid extract is being processed and has not been licensed under 475B090. So the rest of criminal mistreatment is a class, this is all Class B felony. The rest of criminal mistreatment is a crime category 7 and a person crime. And the question is whether the commission wants to make that new way of committing the offense crime category 7 and a person crime or something else.
So the reason for this is you'll see right below that, precursor substances, doing the processing, essentially doing a controlled substances lab. Because we removed cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, I had to parrot that language to make this statute still applicable to marijuana. So I really didn't create a new way of committing this crime. I just preserved the status quo.
I understand.
So what we literally had to read about 400 statutes and see where we had to make the status quo still applicable.
Understood.
I'd say leave it the same.
Agreed.
Yeah, no problem with that one.
Hey, section 44, 163, 547, was this the same thing?
Same thing.
Where
Yeah,
there's the new extract provision of being around extracts, and what I'm hearing from Rob is that since it used to be controlled substances and the definition of controlled substance changed, we had to draft new language to
keep the status quo.
So currently, this is a crime category 6 and a person crime always. The only mandatory one is that the meth part was mandatory, but the commission category, the whole thing is a crime category 6 and a person crime. So keep the same.
I can't think of a reason why you wouldn't.
Okay. Endangering the welfare of a minor, same thing. We added or cannabis because it's no longer a controlled substance. Endangering the welfare of a minor is an misdemeanor that is currently a person crime. Keep it a person crime, or keep this cannabis away.
Yes.
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 All right. Racketeering activity. The definition of racketeering activity is a super long statute, and the definition was slightly changed to specifically include statutes relating to marijuana items. Racketeering isn't specifically categorized right now.
It needs to remain that way.
So that's the question. You want to keep it? Yeah.
I just had to amend the statute to make it conform. This is truly just a conforming amendment.
Yep. Everybody good with that?
Yep.
All right. Spain was 167,262. There is an A felony and there is an A misdemeanor. Currently, let's see, it's crime category 8 if the minor is less than 3 years younger than the offender. Otherwise, it's a crime category 4 and not a person crime. Do we want to continue the same categorization? Despite adding or a marijuana item to controlled substance, once controlled substance is mentioned, and changing the class A misdemeanor to being delivery for consideration of no less than, instead of 5 grams, now it's 1 ounce.
And I did that to conform to the other statute that was higher up in 302, I forget.
Was that the legislature's intent that we conform?
We had to, because if I had just removed cannabis from Controlled Substances Act, it would have had massive secondary implications all across ORS that would have affected things like landlord-tenant law, employment law, and all this other stuff. So we had to actually go in and add these kind of words to hundreds of statutes to make them still applicable. And the ones that Susan's going through are just the ones that relate to criminal law, but you'll see she's skipping over lots of sections.
Yeah.
And that's because we had to amend, I mean, we literally looked at hundreds of statutes.
Yeah, the rest of these look like similar housekeeping type
Yeah, I skipped 222, which is also housekeeping.
changes.
Which is, you know, let me skim this stuff. See, I think everything else on this list pretty much is just technical and like you could keep it in essence for the rest of this list because they were technical and conforming amendments that need some changes to continue because of the change in terminology, taking marijuana out of control substance. Before it used to be.
I'd agree with that.
So for the rest of this list, 47 on down.
I mean, the question is really, is doing these conforming amendments
Right.
to these statutes, does somebody have an argument as to why the status quo should be changed and should somehow treat marijuana differently than any of these
Right.
statutes? And I can't think of any, but that's just me.
So I can draft, you know, make the rule changes or non-changes following, just kind of keeping the status quo, and then you folks can see what that looks like when we come back and see what you think, if that's the way you might want to proceed.
Sounds good.
Another status quo thing that, unless I hear objections from you folks, I will plan to do is there were a bunch of statutes that were repealed. And those have mandatory 475, 900 classifies a whole bunch of controlled substance offenses mandatorily. It classifies some that were repealed. Now the repealed ones are out. In theory, you could choose to change the mandatory classifications that you have authority to change to mandatory. So I will just proceed with keeping the mandatory classifications despite the fact that some of the statutes that are being classified are not. Unless I hear an objection from you folks, you can see what that looks like when we come back next time too.
That sounds fine.
Okay. And then we just have 2355 that should be quick. And do you want to talk about 2355?
Sure. So I crafted the possession of controlled substance provisions in that bill. I didn't craft the rest of the bill, but I think you're only talking PCS provisions.
Yeah, sections.
What that did fundamentally is reduce a lot of felony possession of controlled substances to misdemeanors. If you look at the little handout, one pager that Susan sent to you, something I created for law enforcement, and you'll see the basic structure is the same for all of the controlled substances. So basically, possession of controlled substance starting August 15th is a Class A misdemeanor instead of a felony, unless one of a few things happen. There is a usable quantity, in other words, the crime lab can actually weigh it, and there is a prior felony conviction. There are 2 prior usable quantity UCS convictions. It's a commercial drug offense, or people have more than just a user amount. In this case, methamphetamine would be 2 grams, and it's that same basic structure. So everything got defelonized, except if you fall into one of those 4 boxes, and those remain C felonies. So I did not engage in the substance of this bill, but they allowed me to craft it. So it would, I guess they trust me to write drug laws. I don't know why, but they do. And so my take on it is this one's really easy to deal with. All of the C felonies should remain just as they are. Non-person felonies, I think they're all 1s. All the misdos should be non-person misses. I think
there's one that is unchanged. If we can scroll down a little bit on the section 9 that's on the screen right now to get to 6A.
Did I mess up something?
It's 475, 752 to 6A, that manufacturing or delivering a Schedule 4 controlled substance, thereby causing death to a person, which is in 752, which is in this bill. There we go. That's it.
Where?
See the 6A stop? Right.
Standing person. Yeah, but I didn't change that.
You didn't change that.
That's what we talked about.
That's still a
before.
person crime. So
That's still delivered by a Schedule 4 thing that was missing from.
That's the only thing on this 2355 is the drug offenses, which are section 9 through 15 in the chart that I handed out, that is currently a person crime, is that. Nothing else is currently a person crime. And so kind of the question about the person crime would be, now that we've defelonized a bunch of stuff, is there some reason why you want to elevate something that wasn't a person crime to a person crime? I would anticipate you want to keep this as a person crime because it hasn't changed at all.
I would agree with that. And
Agreed.
Okay. And otherwise, your crime categories are mandatory for all of these because they're all covered by 475-900 that sets out mandatory crime categories. So my assumption would be that the commission would want to classify mandatory under crime categories and to not make anything new person crime. Okay. I think that it might be it for now. There was one. Back to the 302. Okay, so I'm looking, when I was going over my materials for the meeting, I looked at the current Division 19 rules, which are what we would change. All of the controlled substance offenses are in Division 19. And there were a couple in there that did not change in 302, but that incorporated 752, which was changed in 25 as an element. Well, unless I hear different from you folks, I will keep it the same as it is now, even though its sort of underlying offense changed slightly because of the changes in 752 to change the definition of controlled substance. Jackson, good? Yes, okay. Thank you all for that extra minutes of your time. I appreciate it. This is complicated stuff, and you guys had really good discussion. Let me know if you have any questions about any of this. Like,
Susan, I wonder.
Thank you, Susan.
Walk us through the rulemaking process. So we now had this initial hearing where the commission has weighed in, and our chair will make sure that that's a finalized, recommendation to you for drafting. So what does this kick off for us in terms of timelines, and what are our next steps as the commission?
So what happens now is there are some mandatory notice periods that have to take place before final rules can be adopted. And there are several of them. Legislators have to get at least 49 days of notice before a rule can be adopted. Interested parties, which are folks that have written in and asked the commission for notification of its rulemaking activities, have to get at least 28 days of notice. The public has to get at least 21 days of notice, and there's a notice rule that the commission has with some folks in it, and those folks have to get 28 days of notice. So what happens now is that notice contains some components that includes sending out the draft rules, what we talked about today. I will incorporate into a draft form and send it over probably to Mike so that Mike can look at it and just get everyone's over, let me know if everything looks like what we discussed here today. And then we have to draft up a notice that talks about, you have to include a statement of need and fiscal impact and a summary of the proposed rules and all of that sort of thing. Once that is ready, then Julie will file that notice and email it to the legislators and give it to the Secretary of State's office. And that notice has to be out there for at least 49 days. It's the shortest period, that's the longest notice has to be given. And the public can send in comments during that time. At the conclusion of the notice period, which we will set a date for the end of that time, then the commission will need to reconvene, consider any comments that came in during that comment period from the public, and then look at what we drafted and decide whether or not it wants to adopt it in that form or whether you want to make a change, and then we can make the change and you can adopt it in the changed form. And then it can be effective at any point in the future. I'm assuming you'll want these effective upon filing, but that's up to you because because it's the date now, this is going to go into the new year. So all the crimes that are effective January 1st of 18 will already have been in effect for a few weeks probably by the time we finalize the process. Any questions about any of that?
Any questions, commissioners? Technically, I guess there's no public here. We generally open this up for public comment, but seeing none, we'll leave that to after the notice period.
And I noticed that people
Yeah.
show up in droves when we're doling out money.
Right.
But we're engaged in rulemaking, and nobody's here.
And is there any further discussion about the draft rules here today? So we will begin that process, and I think with that, that's all we have really to do today. Okay? Thank you very much, everybody. I'll adjourn this meeting.
Thank you.
And happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, likewise.
Talk.
Yeah, we need a gavel, you're right.